Hi, I'm Antonia, and I hope the stage is safe to admit to the fact that I love process. I really love streamlining stuff to reduce friction. I love it when structure takes the guesswork out of a project and frees up your headspace. The flip side of that love is that I find it incredibly frustrating when a process that's supposed to save you time doesn't do that. So a few years ago, I went from being a tech lead and an IC to being an engineering manager and a team lead. And what I was expecting was a lot of, coaching my reports and team strategy. But I was surprised to find how much time I was spending on generating paperwork to keep my stakeholders in the loop. Like, a truly enormous amount of paperwork. The team that I was leading at the time was in charge of optimizing one of Duolingo's most recognizable features, the streak. And we ran more experiments than almost any other team in the company. So almost, more paperwork than almost any other team in the company as well. And I thought, hey, this is a prime opportunity for automation and for processes that can save me time. But it turned out the processes that I designed were not serving me. In fact, before too long, I was serving them as their full-time babysitter. So this talk is a case study of my attempts to quit that job, the babysitting job, not the team lead job. Many of those attempts failed. But the ones that I succeeded led me to find five elements of self-sustaining processes. I hope that these 5 elements will serve as a lens for you to look at the systems in your life and diagnose why they might be falling short of what they promised to deliver. The second thing that I hope you'll walk away with is a lens through which to look at the office housework, the chores. These words already kind of paint a picture of this being work that is really annoying, that is reluctantly done, work that should take a backseat to real work. And I think that the way we look at this, the way that we talk about this work, paints this picture, and the value that we assign to the work directly translates to a lack of motivation to make the work less annoying, to make it less soul-crushing. And I think that's a problem. We should... Oh, monitor just went out. Everything's fine. We're less motivated to fix the work, make it less soul-crushing, because we don't give a lot of value to the work. But what if we didn't look at the value of the work? What if we looked at the value of the soul that's being crushed? What if we lowered our tolerance for soul-crushing work entirely? Throughout this talk, I'm going to explore the time and the emotional overhead of being a process owner and how to take those hidden costs into account when you're deciding which processes to improve. All right, so let's jump straight into the case study. I'll just do this on my computer. Here we go. All right. Let us jump straight into the case study. Here we go. It starts with a beautiful promise, right? You take information out of people's heads and you put it into a system. Anyone can look it up at any time. You don't have to interrupt your engineers when you want a status update. You just put it out of the project management system. You move on with your life. Amazing. Based on that promise, I built a script to prepare for a weekly meeting with my stakeholders, our area leads. If each engineer contributed their piece of the puzzle and put it into the system, then the script could generate a doc from that, populate it with progress updates, and us human team leads only had to drop in our human insights, like how things are actually going, what's next, what we wanted feedback on. Because our team ran so many small experiments, the script eliminated up to 2 hours of incredibly tedious copy and pasting of information from various data sources into our notes. It was really satisfying, it was really neat, it was efficient, and it had a big problem, which is it was really vulnerable to people playing along and using the system. If your project management system is not being kept up to date, then that beautiful promise is broken, right? Your automation that you built on top of the system becomes garbage in, garbage out. When that system no longer reflects reality, you're standing at a fork in the road. You can give up, or you can double down. And the slide's kind of giving it away. Neither of those options is really great. So you can abandon your system. You can go back to asking people for updates directly. It's lightweight, right? And as a startup, we love lightweight. If you're expecting 1 or 2 updates a week and not dozens, maybe that works. If the thing, though, is that your cost remains that you have to interrupt somebody when you want to know something. You break their flow, they have to context switch. And the information is still only in people's heads, right? It is invisible to any automation that could make your life easier down the road. You can also do what I did, and you can double down. You nudge, you nag, you do the updates yourself, you enforce compliance, but you've now made yourself a critical part of that process. The good thing is that the downstream processes, right, your automations and everything, they still work because you prepared that for them. You still save those 2 hours a week. But at what cost? Let's zoom in a little bit. Even on the surface, you can see that each of these nudge loops to get your engineers to keep the system up to date, they each take time, right? This does not scale super well for a busy team. But the true price that I found myself paying was emotional overhead. The bill that my anxious brain presented to me looked more like this. My co-lead and I were saving 2 hours a week, but I was spending the equivalent of that time, babysitting the process, making updates myself, and doing a whole lot of screaming into the void. I despaired over how many conversations with my engineers turned into reminders to please, please, please update the system, or lectures on why process was so important. What I had set out to do was free up my time and headspace so I could focus on leadership, on coaching, on helping my engineers do their best work. But more than once, I found myself talking to friends and venting about how I felt like a parent asking their child for the 100th time to please clean up their room. I really hated how irritated that made me feel, and I could start feeling that it was affecting my relationships with my engineers. Something had to change, and I wish I could say that it was just how painful the situation was, but I needed a bit of an external catalyst. Duolingo has a really generous perk for employees that hit 10 years of tenure. It's a 2-month sabbatical. Mine was coming up. And I had to take a really hard look at everything that I would be leaving behind for my co-lead and for my interim team lead. As team leads, we had gotten used to these automations that were saving us 2 hours a week, right? There was no way we would be going back to doing everything by hand. But I had to face the reality that the only thing that kept that system going was me, and I could not rely on others to be the glue in the same way that I had been. So that pushed me to act. And the first thing I did was take stock of the process, right? On the left-hand side, up there, you can see a representation of the product development lifecycle. On the right, our project management system that captures key parts of that lifecycle. So let's walk through a typical project. Each purple dot represents a human touching the system. So in the beginning, you get a product manager and a designer, and they create the initial task. The engineer takes a look, gives a rough estimate. How much work is this going to be? During development, they refine that estimate and update the target delivery date. In fact, this might happen more than once because estimation, as Sean said, is hard, and it takes a while to master. As we walk through the life cycle of the project, humans make updates to the system to make it accurately reflect where in the life cycle we are. But not all of these work steps are created equal. In this slide, I've changed each of the human intervention dots to a little warning sign whenever there was already a different source of truth for that information in another system. The second gray thing that just appeared is the system that we use to track our experiments. And it turns out that already covered a lot of our product development lifecycle. So the first key insight was, what I was asking folks to do was duplicative. Their understandable reluctance to do the busy work of copying information from one system into the other made them write off the entire process as busy work. Crucial parts, like information going from an individual head into the system, those few remaining purple dots, got lost in what felt like pointless chores. So I connected the systems. I had the project management system pull from the experiment system automatically. And more broadly, I defined each source of truth for each piece of information. And I only required human action for the information that lived only in human heads. This significantly reduced the number of steps that humans had to take. And a principle emerged: don't ask humans to do work that can be automated. This turned into the first element of self-sustaining processes: minimally invasive. Even at face value, this is pretty clear already. Keep the ask that you're making as small as possible. But I actually found the idea of minimally invasive surgery to be a really helpful guiding metaphor. So in this kind of surgery, you lean on really sophisticated technology like cameras, robots, really, really tiny incisions to reduce the trauma to the patient's body. It's gentler for them and speeds up the healing process, but it requires more skill and investment from the surgeon. And that's how I started thinking about process. I would take on more of the complexity behind the scenes to build better tooling, so the experiments from my team could be simpler, smoother, and easier to stick with. Speaking of behind the scenes, I mentioned earlier that I had made myself a part of the process by flagging mistakes that my team had made, and sometimes even fixing them when I just couldn't take bothering them a third time. I did a whole bunch of work to fill in the gaps to make sure the information in our system was accurate and up to date, so the information that was built on top of it could run smoothly. Meanwhile, my team didn't know what happened to their updates. Since they didn't see the automated status updates generated from their input, they didn't see when they were wrong. There was no feedback letting them know if they had done 10 or 80% of the required tasks correctly, because I silently topped that number up to 100%. And the worst thing is, I really thought I was helping. I was not. Now, what actually helped? So far, us team leads had used the data in the system to automate updates for our stakeholders. But because the infrastructure already existed, it was easy to automate a heads-up message in a shared channel for each engineer's stakeholders, like designers and QA. And if that automated heads-up cried wolf because we had the wrong target delivery date in the system, it was really natural for the engineers to go, oh, whoops, false alarm, sorry, QA, and then go and update the system themselves, which meant that future automations, like my weekly status update, could pull in the most accurate information possible. This one move turned our process from a black box into a chain of visible cause and effect. And it created real value for QA and design at effectively no extra cost. This makes transparency the second element of self-sustaining processes. Every action should have a tangible reaction, and everything you do as a process owner should be documented and out in the open. Now, at this point, it was time for me to step down from my role as the babysitter of our process. It had to learn to speak up for itself. Even with a reduced set of tasks to complete for my team, there was still plenty of potential for human error, misconfiguration, or just things falling through the cracks. I was sending fewer reminders, but most of them kind of looked the same. So I took inspiration from our code review etiquette, which states that reviewers should not give automatable feedback, like use single quotes. We rely on linters and auto-formatters to ensure that our coding conventions are followed. So I started to think about what a process linter could look like.
Hope you're enjoying this video, but did you know LeadDev has lots more to offer?
So webinar, podcasts, I even like articles, conferences, events, and most importantly, community.
And even thinking about like process, tech, and people, which is how LeadDev website is laid out, I really think this is the #1 learning platform for me as an engineering manager.
Don't forget to check out leaddev.com.
Following the spirit of transparency, I defined each task that the team needed to complete, and I created an automation that flagged whenever that task was not complete or had been completed incorrectly. Now, this wasn't just me automating the exact job that I had been doing. I suspect that my team would tell you that the two of us can be hard to tell apart, but there is a difference between me and a Jira automation. I, a human, would usually only discover that a mistake had been made at the very tail end of the project. But the mistake had been made back when the project was first set up, right? The automation could flag that mistake right when it happened. Getting feedback that you forgot to do something 3 weeks ago triggers a shrug at best. Getting feedback minutes after helps to reinforce that at this particular stage of the project, this particular task needs to be done. So this is the third element of self-sustaining processes, and I'll be the first to admit that self-healing is still a little aspirational at the moment. The process doesn't actually patch itself up, but it's very vocal about where it's hurt. You could imagine a future where it goes much further and it proposes a fix itself, so issues can be fixed with just a single click. Until then, my rule is that the process is only allowed to flag issues if they can be fixed within 30 seconds or less. If the cognitive overhead is low enough, people are more likely to get on board. What else gets people on board? Public shaming. This is obviously just a joke. Shaming people for using Jira wrong is really, really bad for your credibility, both as a leader and as a human. This point is a quick one, but it's important. The process flags that I described are automated pings at the end of the day, and at least at Duolingo, you probably get about 10 of these a week. DMs from a bot or generic messages to a channel like, hey team, here's a reminder, are notoriously ignorable. So a powerful tweak was to have these flags go to the team channel and tag the engineer in question directly. First, yeah, it does add a bit of social pressure. You don't want to be called out for the same trivially fixable offense 3 days in a row. But more importantly, it boosts awareness. An alert to one person to address an omission doesn't just get the missing thing filled in. It helps the whole team remember to include it from the start the next time. Our process is now minimally invasive, transparent, self-healing, or at least vocal, and with this tweak, it's become socially reinforcing. And it is truly no longer my process, it's our process. It's how our team does things. The process has turned from a patient on life support to something like the classroom pet. Everyone is aware of its needs, and everyone understands how to take care of it. But to be truly self-sustaining, a process really has to earn its keep. Any process is overhead, and this investment has to pay off. What you're asking for if you've designed your process right is hopefully not a lot. What you're offering in return should feel like a really good deal. I know it was for me. Automating and depersonalizing the nags that I was sending out and that had distracted and weighed me down so much was a game changer. I stopped feeling like a parent and started feeling like a coach again. But what about my team? For less than 10 minutes of work a week, my team got a velocity boost. Automations built on top of the system helped us roll out features to users the moment it was safe to do so, as opposed to whenever we remembered to on our own. They also got more visibility for unglamorous but important work. When engineers flagged in a health check that they did not have time to clean up code and plan refactors because they were rushing from one experiment to the other, I was able to set up an automation the same day that created cleanup tickets as soon as an experiment was launched. And having a paper trail of how the target delivery date of a feature had changed over time created a really helpful feedback loop. Giving accurate estimates is a skill that takes years to develop, and that paper trail makes it trivial for engineers to see how they're doing. On the team lead side, I already mentioned that we were saving hours every week by having a script generate the notes for our stakeholder sync, so human team leads only had to drop in their human insights. And I take great pride in the fact that compiling these notes required zero copy-pasting by the time I stopped being a team lead. So velocity gains in this column too. We also had our own feedback loops. I became briefly obsessed with creating all of these custom visualizations of our work, including this experiment calendar with the green and the red. That was an easy way for us to get visual feedback on which experiments had been successful and which hadn't. Our engineers got an easy way to get feedback on their estimation skills. We got an easy way to get feedback on how good we were at predicting experiment impact. And once I became an area lead earlier this year, I was able to apply the same processes to streamline updates for all the teams in my area. What had taken years to grow on my team was something that other team leads could copy in a matter of days, and I'm actively working right now on getting that number down to hours. At the moment, about 7 teams at Duolingo are using some or all parts of this process, with a lot more on the way. In the end, we're still a small company with pockets that operate like small startups. But there were pockets that were ready for processes that would free up time for leaders. And to those pockets, we were able to offer a golden path. If they opted in to setting up projects a certain way, they would get all the benefits that I just mentioned for free, plus any future improvements. What had started out as a way to solve my own frustration had taken on a life of its own and started creating value for folks who were not me, or even like me. It became a sort of curb-cutting effect. The system may have been designed for one person that loves process and is fairly anxious, but people that were neither of those things benefited from the velocity gains and the feedback loops. And that's ultimately why I'm here, not just to talk to you about how I solved a me problem, but to zoom out from there to something that could be a you problem and share how I think about solutions. But first, let's do a little detour to this guy here that you might have encountered in primary school. It's called the fire triangle. A fire needs 3 elements, oxygen, heat, and fuel. Remove just one, and the fire goes out. With this fire triangle in mind, let's move on to the process pentagon. When the 5 elements of self-sustaining processes are all present, then a process will hopefully, sustain itself and free you up to do happier things. If a process doesn't run itself, then it could be that it's missing one of those 5 elements. For example, it could be so labor-intensive that people abandon it when things get busy. Or worse, that people abandon other work to feed the process. That's also not great. A process that is not socially reinforcing is likely a process that will stop running the moment you step away from it. And then there are some processes that aren't just not self-sustaining, they are actively confusing, and they create a weird, punitive culture where people go about their business and suddenly, lightning bolt out of the blue, the system yells at them for doing something wrong, and they have no idea what it was and how to fix it. That's exhausting. I found that whenever a process isn't working as well as it could, it's a helpful exercise to see which elements are and aren't present. How to decide whether to try and add those elements and improve the process feels more like an art than a science. So to wrap us up, I'll talk you through how I think about where to invest, and maybe that inspires you to come up with your own rules. Now, first of all, I think more often than not, we don't set out and say, let me see which processes we can improve. The starting point is more often, wow, this is really painful. Somebody should do something about it, just not me. But what makes you say that? Why aren't you making that investment? And you may have, at one point or another, found yourself thinking one or all of these things. But I think they're all bad reasons not to invest in process improvements. First of all, in terms of the time spent and the time saved, the math is just not that simple. One, the time you spend automating is likely time spent in a happier headspace than the time you spend copy-pasting information or nagging people. And if the 2 minutes you spent nagging end up hijacking your mood for the next 2 hours, your cost is not 2 minutes, your cost is 2 hours. You might say, I don't need this. I'm not lazy. Little manual work doesn't scare me, and neither does staying an extra hour to get the status update done. Well, maybe it should. especially in the United States where I work, there can be a stigma to wanting to make things easier for yourself. But not acknowledging that both our time and our energy are finite and precious resources is hurting us and is keeping us stuck with processes that waste those resources. Because yes, you do have more important work to do, which is precisely why you should fix the things that get in the way of you showing up for that work the way you need to. I have found these questions to be a helpful grounding exercise. What is your highest leverage work? For me, it's coaching my direct reports through challenging situations. What I need to do that well is to be emotionally stable so I can create a psychologically safe environment for them. So I make a point of trying to fix processes that help protect that asset. Sorry, not the processes. I try to make a point of fixing processes if that helps me protect the asset. So if it helps me get more rest or avoid anxiety spirals. Each person in this room will have a different answer, but we all have a finite number of hours in our days and a finite supply of energy that is worth preserving for where it matters the most. Another thing that we all have in common is something called the IKEA effect, which is a cognitive bias that makes people value furniture more if they have assembled it themselves. More broadly speaking, we tend to fall into the trap of, I put a lot of effort into it, so it must be worth a lot. So how does this relate to your work as a team lead again? Consider stakeholder syncs. Ideally, they're 20% status updates, 80% discussion. But if you spent 80% of your prep time on the status update, then the IKEA effect will make you want to spend 80% of that sync on your status update and only 20% on the discussion. The time and effort that you put into that status update will make you want to run a meeting that could have been an email. Even just knowing about the IKEA effect can help you fight its influence. But if you repeatedly catch yourself putting minor deliverables on a pedestal because of how effortful they were to create, it might be time to invest in process to bring the effort down instead of elevating that deliverable. So here's just one last reminder of the 5 elements of self-sustaining processes. To keep that process pentagon from falling apart, consider designing your processes to be minimally invasive, transparent, self-healing, socially reinforcing, and worth the investment. And how do you decide if it's worth fixing bad processes? Consider if they're secretly consuming resources that you need to do your highest leverage work, or if they're tricking you into overvaluing something because it was painful to create. You may have noticed, but talking about this kind of stuff is one of my absolute favorite things. So if you want to chat more about this, please come find me at office hours right after this. Thank you all so much.